A very good morning to everybody. That's if it's still morning wherever you are. And thank you very much, Louisa. Now, for our session, we are going to look at how best we can connect the three critical pillars of our AI future. So when you look at the conversations that have been going on so far, the critical pillars that have been identified, you include the public sector, includes startups, and then you have the judiciary. And in this session, we are going to look at how best we can ensure that these three work in harmony to promote innovation, ensure the responsible deployment of artificial intelligence, and also create a legal backstop to check excesses that come up. So to help me with this discussion, we've carefully selected three people from these three sectors, from the startup ecosystem, from the public sector, and from the judiciary to help us. Now, joining us from the startup ecosystem is Ilamusi Ekenimo, who is a regulatory and technology policy expert with a decade of experience shaping digital governance, AI policy, and cross-border regulatory strategy. She presently works at Flutterwave, where she manages the global public policy function, contributing to successful multi-country licensing efforts, and also contributing to high-impact policy engagement with global forums, including the UNGA and the World Bank, and leading on Flutterwave's global ESG framework development. She has also worked at Meta, where she worked on data protection and privacy strategy across sub-Saharan Africa and managed stakeholder engagement and supported regulatory analysis for product launches. More importantly, Ilamusi has a legal background from a Tier 1 African law firm, and she has co-drafted and advised on landmark legislations like the Reserved Seed Bill and, crucially, the Nigerian Startup Act, which is the first subject matter specific legislation on startups in Nigeria. She's known for integrating inclusive governance frameworks with emerging technology trends, and she's very passionate about developing interoperable and ethical national and cross-border digital policies to regulate emerging technologies. Ilamusi, if you are here, if you could kindly show us your camera and then say hi so that I can introduce the next panelist.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Very nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, coming from the public sector is Mr. Emmanuel Vitus. And Mr. Emmanuel Vitus is an international consultant in cyber diplomacy, digital governance, and national artificial intelligence strategies. He advises governments, multilateral institutions, and development partners, including the UNDP, the African Union, the ECOWAS, UNECA, ITU, UNESCO, Internet Society, ICANN, possibly every other international society you can possibly think of. And he leads a strategic advisory and research firm focused on artificial intelligence strategy, digital governance, innovation, and technological sovereignty in Africa. His work supports national AI strategies, regional coordination, and ethical frameworks for inclusive and sustainable digital transformation. He's also a scholar at the University of Malta, where his research explores how African philosophies, epistemologies, ethics, and historical perspectives illuminate the deeper moral architecture of artificial intelligence and the future of digital sovereignty. If Mr. Emmanuel Vitus is here, kindly show yourself and then say to our audience online so that I can introduce the final panelist.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join this panel and share insights from the work we have been doing with governments across the continent, and I hope looking forward to a great discussion.
Our final panelist for this session, he is a Justice of the High Court of the Republic of Ghana, and he's recognized for his commitment to judicial excellence, ethical governance, and the strengthening of institutional integrity within the justice system. His judicial philosophy is grounded in fairness, transparency, and the continuous enhancement of access to justice. Justice Abloh has developed a keen interest in the intersection of law, governance, and emerging technologies, and his position on the bench as a judge positions him uniquely to speak on judicial governance and AI regulation. He particularly has a keen interest because I've met him on a couple of panels, and I can attest to the fact that even last year on this same platform, he was a panelist on some other models. Now, he brings to this program practical judicial experience, a strong ethical orientation, and a forward-looking perspective on how our courts can adapt to and responsibly regulate artificial intelligence while uploading the law. My lordship, if you are here, kindly say hello to the rest of our audience so that we can get into our discussion.
Hello to everyone. It's still morning here, so good morning, and it's a pleasure to join this panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. So from morning, we've been having discussions around artificial intelligence. Now, just hammered how it is important to have a localized session and how we can have artificial intelligence be more useful to us having regard to our local context. So let me go to Ilamusi to start this session. You come from the startup background. You've had the opportunity to contribute to drafting the first Startup Act for Nigeria. Now, in your view, what do you consider to be the biggest regulatory function today that is preventing an AI startup in Lagos from becoming a continental leader tomorrow?
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. First of all, when you were reading my bio, I was wondering whether it was me you were speaking about. But it's very nice to be here to speak directly to your question. Particularly because I have a regulatory background, I would say that maybe the single biggest friction for a startup in Lagos or in anywhere else in Africa trying to expand would be the lack of harmonization. There is a very big regulatory barrier in Africa with the variance between laws in different countries, even within regional blocks. So within West Africa, for example, we have different laws regarding data protection, or we have different standards regarding cross-border data flows, or different standards for even establishing a startup in those different countries. So it's very difficult for a startup in Lagos or in Ghana to cross over to the other countries just because of all the different regulatory frameworks that exist. So I would say the lack of regulatory harmonization is a really, really big problem for startups across Africa, particularly in the AI space.
That is quite interesting because I think from the morning's discussion, we've had similar issues and the consideration of a harmonized regulatory system. Some have even suggested the use of AFTA as a platform to regularize and then harmonize regulation so that we can have one continental framework. And the fact that you mentioned it only highlights it again that it still remains a problem. Now, let me come to Emmanuel. You have worked with various government and then international institutions. Now, from your experience and from the UNDP's global perspective, it has become almost as if governments are rushing to adopt AI for public services. And so across Africa, day in, day out, you have strategies being launched, you have new policies being launched, you have various public services being launched. Now, what do you consider, in your view, in government's attempts to rush for adopting public services and digital ID to be the most commonly overlooked risk that threatens to exclude the very citizens that these systems are meant to serve?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. I think the most overlooked risk is a structural exclusion created by the data itself. You know, I'll speak better on what I'm working right now because I've been in Guinea working on the national AI strategy for Guinea. And as we work with the ministries, we noticed that for a national strategy, we saw that many citizens are not properly represented in the foundational data sets. So names are spelled differently, people are not fully registered, entire community lack connectivity, and several local languages do not exist in the digital form. And these gaps enter an AI system or a digital ID rollout, exclusion become, automatic and almost invisible. Citizens who are already vulnerable become even more excluded. So the priority is to strengthen the foundation data, maintain offline access, and ensure that citizens can challenge automated decisions. Because as you know, in most of our countries today, the data, it exists, but not in a format government can use. And anytime they talk about data, I always say Africans have their own way of actually identifying and classifying their data. When people are talking about personal data, for example, I always say, look, in Africa, personal data is not really personal because the human being in Africa is in a community. And in that community, just give your name. If you tell me that your name is Nicholas, if I ask your surname, I should probably know where you're coming from, your tribe, your village. Maybe the next question will be, who is your uncle? Is your uncle this minister? That alone can actually trace me back, to maybe 200 years of data. So Africans, that's how they kept data from generation to generation. So now with this whole, AI boom and, data boom going on, governments are trying to follow the trend, but we forget, philosophically and ideally, how do we actually save our data? How do we create our data, etc. in Africa? That is the reason why it's difficult for our government, one, to create data, second, to save data, because we are following a trend that does not reflect our reality. So we have to really think back how Africans, value data, how Africans create data, and how Africans actually save data for generations. So I think we have been noticing all that I said, and from what we are doing right now is to see, shall we continue following the global trend, or we should look at it from sociological point of view in African continent and create our data going forward, looking at our sociological realities.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I mean, this is very crucial because we know AI is only as good as the data that it is built on. And so if structurally there are defects, what it means is that a significant number of people will not be represented at all. And so all of these other things that we'll be talking about later in this session, biases and others, get deepened and then harms the very system that is supposed to serve them. Now, let me come to your Lordship, Justice Ablo. Your Lordship, I always tell my students that usually by the time one enactment is passed, you have had technology advance about 10 times or sometimes even in 100-fold. And so the law is always playing catch up with technology. However, from the bench where you sit, what do you consider to be the most pressing legal or constitutional principle that you believe must be defended at all costs, even as AI systems become more integrated into our society, so that we don't lose those principles because of the transition towards artificial intelligence in the course of our daily lives?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. And in answering your question, I will refer to a few comments that were made earlier by the keynote speaker, and then also by our sister. And he said that AI and its regulation should not be a barrier. It should be a catalyst to development. And then also, our sister now also said that much as we are looking to enacting binding laws, the approach should not be first to enact binding laws, but rather give ourselves the opportunity to experiment, identify the challenges before we enact these binding laws. I say this because our constitution, especially the Ghanaian constitution, confers and upholds the liberty of the individual. The state has always been a powerful actor in every environment. And so when we jump at first looking at enacting binding laws, most of which are going to look at criminalizing activity, then there might be a problem. The other thing is when the person making the law himself does not even understand the technological challenges that we are talking about. We know recently there has been a problem with an amendment to our, I think, Cybersecurity Act, and the conversations that came up with it. Is it going to lead to reducing the ability for free speech for the ordinary citizen, or is it going to enhance it? Now we find that there seems to be a certain attempt at making it look like there's going to be a restriction and controlling or taking it away from the person. Human rights has been enshrined in our constitution. And so any other law that we intend to enact must be in consonance with these constitutional frameworks that have already been identified. Now, my real answer to this question is that I do not believe in strict binding laws to regulate the adoption and use of AI. And this is because this is an economic matter that must rather allow people to grow. Which partner of the government agencies can help that to happen. It is only the judiciary. The judiciary, because wherever people engage, there will be conflict. And if the conflict is between two parties, the judge must hear both sides before he comes up with his determination. But where the conflict is between the state and an individual, I'm sure you know what happens. Before you are even given the opportunity to speak, some of your rights may be dealt with. And so, like we have seen in contract, in tort, and mercantile practice, people are allowed to interact. Where there are challenges, it comes before the court. The court helps over time in its determinations, keep refining. And then also, when you come, what is the current trend that is ongoing between the technological community? With a good understanding, you help resolve the problem. Then we won't have to be relying on laws that the technological person will say is archaic, is obsolete, cannot help deal with this problem. Where we find issues of intrusion, issues of crime, issues of fraud, there, yes, we can use criminal and punitive laws to deal with. We already have some of these laws in existence: the Cybersecurity Act, Data Protection Act, Electronic Transactions Act. These are already in existence. If there are virtual aspects of it that need to be assimilated, that can easily be done. But going to say we are going to regulate AI, I always ask, what are we regulating? Is it the business of the individual parties? Is it to encourage the people to use it? Is it to tell them not to use it at all? Any professional practitioner in technology, the moment you introduce that, will become rebellious or might not even be given the opportunity to go and expand as it's supposed to do. Here now is our challenge. Is the judge well aware or understands the nuances of AI and technology? Most of us clearly are not. And sometimes when people hear, I'm so interested in these things, what is a judge interested in these things for? How can he even have conversations when it comes to these things? How do we deal with the nuances in there and how it is supposed to be applied to enable the business community? We have talked about investment. How will the investor come when he knows that if I have a challenge with another person, the court cannot assist me? Because when I have a challenge, it is the court I have to go to. Because of some of these challenges, we now do a lot of arbitration because there you will find the expert. But we need judges who are themselves experts in this area. I will then call for consistent and regular training of persons who sit on the bench that help adjudicate matters. We can't do anything about it. AI is here to stay. Every aspect of our lives are affected by AI. So, yes, there are constitutional provisions to support us. In regulating, we should be careful. Rather, I would preach that, look, like we develop the common law, let us also do the same with these, with competent justices or judges who understand the nuances in the area and can contribute fairly to that. Thank you very much.
Your Lordship, your point highlights an issue that we had when we were having the National AI consultation for Ghana.
Yes.
So there was a stakeholder meeting with the GBA, and as part of the partner institutions, the judiciary had been removed as a core pillar. And we raised the issue with them that judges are supposed to be resolving challenges that come out of the application of AI. So if you don't consider the judiciary to be a key pillar, regardless of what you develop, you are inviting judges to apply obsolete law or apply less competencies in resolving the disputes that come up of the new technology you have. So I think it's a crucial point that you make there. But that takes me to my next round of questions, and I think I want to stay on you for this.
Right.
We know that one of the biggest challenges with artificial intelligence has to do with the accountability gap, that where there is a failure, who becomes liable for purposes of AI? Now, I want to paint a picture to you in a practical courtroom scenario. So you are sitting on a regular Monday morning, and then the case is called, and before you realize, the subject of the case is that the government is deploying an AI-powered welfare system. But after deploying the system, which was built by a local startup, a Ghanaian, a Nigerian, a Tanzanian startup, that system has wrongly denied the citizen their benefits due to a biased algorithm, perhaps because of the exclusion that the manual spoke about or a problem in the foundational data set. In that situation, sitting as a high court justice, who becomes liable in your courtroom? does it become the startup, the local startup that built the artificial intelligence system, or the government agency that deployed it without making sure that whatever loopholes there were in that foundational set were filled before deploying it?
Okay, so AI is a tool, and that's one thing we need to understand. The tool is an aid. The tool doesn't make the decision. It is the person making the decision based on the recommendation of the AI tool that is responsible. So, am I able to vet the decision and recommendation of the AI tool? You find that our sister mentioned an issue where there was a query to an AI about Ghanaians who were of influence born in 1935. A list comes up. She could have decided that, okay, oh, this is it, and I'm going to publish that. But based on her knowledge and diligence, because she insisted that, look, I had to check and query. Once she did that, based on some knowledge she earlier had, she was able to now go back and then change the query to refine. Tool now says, well, I am in luck when it comes to this particular one. Give me time to go and think about it. AI is a tool. AI is not the individual. The individual makes the decision based on what AI is producing to him. And so is the government agency able to generate data by itself for the development of the AI tool? We have a statistical service department or unit in Ghana. Do we know the demographics of all Ghanaians with the statistical service? And if there's a departure from that demographic as presented by the AI tool, we should be able to identify it. AI cannot be 100% correct. There's always a problem with it. And one thing that I'd like to say here is that, look, anybody who intends to adopt AI must also be ready to do diligent work because it calls for diligence. It's one of the ethical principles that we must abide by if we choose to apply an AI tool. So if you do not find yourself in a situation where you can be diligent with the use of an AI tool, then you are better off not using it. We've seen enough examples to know that when we are using large data models, hallucinations may occur. Even with the small ones that are specified for a particular area, there may be departures. Is the departure based on my query or based on how it was developed? I can only rely on it when I know what I'm expecting. When what is produced, I have diligently cross-checked and I'm satisfied that it matches the data. Here also, we may want to veer into, okay, how do we collect the data? How do we clean the data before we even apply it? The chain is quite long, but the final responsibility goes to the person who says, AI gave me this. I am using it. The moment I said I am using it, AI didn't do anything. He only gave you what he knew. Thank you very much.
So if I understand you, what it means is that regardless of the development, you cannot just take what AI gives you and run with it. And in recent time, 15, particularly within the legal profession, lawyers held accountable for filing briefs with cases that were non-existent because they used artificial intelligence.
I was going to go into that. And you know, there was this other case about AI and intellectual property. The rulings has been consistent. AI doesn't have the ability to own anything that they chose as a way of intellectual property. It's the human being, you know, because even what it produces is based on the query that you give. It's only sampling the information and then now trying to push something up. It all depends on the individual. It's the individual who has diligence.
Let me come back to Ilamusi. Now, hearing the answer of my Lord and the fact that it is the person who uses it who ultimately becomes responsible for the content that he puts out. In any case, under some circumstances, the startup or the entity developing that program may still bear some responsibility regarding how it sets up the program. Now, hearing what has been going on so far, what does that legal uncertainty, particularly when it comes to liability and responsibility, the fact that they may fall on the person who ultimately uses it or the startup, mean for a startup's ability to get investment and insurance? And given your vast experience also, can you tell us practically how a startup can prepare for this kind of liability in case an AI they have developed missteps or falters or leaves some accountability issues?
So that's a very long question. And so I'm going to give you a very long answer. Allow me to draw us back to where Justice Abloh stopped. I think it was a very interesting conversation that you were having. I want to pose a slightly different scenario because I think that the scenario that the justice was using was one where a human being makes the final decision. So you ask AI, should my child go to this school or this school? And it says, oh, your child should go to this school because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 reasons. A human being has the final decision-making power in that scenario. What I want to ask about is in cases of pure automation. In cases where, for example, we've talked about the mass adoption of artificial intelligence into public service, which is something I'm really passionate about and something that I'm researching on currently. So that's why I have a lot to say about this. But work with me. So let's envisage a system where, for example, maybe Ghana wants to automate maybe some system for its citizens. We have digital identification, or he wants to make, in Nigeria, we have the NIN. So let's say there's a Ghanaian version of that. And Ghana, based on this digital identification, wants to now maybe tax people. So they want to link it to your digital apps, any loan apps, anything online. They want to link this digital identity to those apps, right? A human being cannot manually approve every single or cross-check every single for example, digital identity. Let's say you're learning. It cannot cross-check that, okay, you are actually learning with digital identity number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, who is connected to maybe this OPay app. A human being cannot do that on that level, which is why we have automation, which is why we have AI. So I want to point out that there are situations where a human being will not be making the final decision, which is why we have automated decision making as a big problem in AI. There will be situations where only the AI, we've created systems, we've created patterns that the AI is supposed to interpret, which is what it does. The machine learns from the data we put in. It learns from the patterns of human beings who do the work, and then it replicates those patterns. And those patterns are not always perfect, but it will replicate those patterns. So in that instance, then, who do you blame? Do you blame the human whose patterns are replicated? Do you blame the person, maybe the government, for example, for even suggesting that we should use this particular AI model? Does the government blame the developer of the AI model? Or do you blame maybe the Ministry of Information or your Statistics Bureau, whoever curated the data? It's not as simple, in my opinion, as saying the human being is ultimately responsible. I'm getting to your question. This is just the first part. It's not as simple as that, because automated decision making is a big thing. It's inevitable considering the scale of like our citizenry these days. The population numbers compared to the number of people in government, there's a big mismatch. The civil service cannot handle that weight, which is why we're seeing some of the gaps that we're seeing in our different African countries today. So focusing or putting the responsibility back on human beings. For example, if I'm a civil servant and I was the person who the AI is copying, for example, or who the AI model was modeled after, my life is finished. Because imagine if the AI uses my models me and then makes mistake for over 10,000 people, and I'm ultimately responsible, and they sue me, all 10,000 people, because I have liability. Then will I want to work in government? Who is going to then bear that liability? Nobody is going to want to be the person ultimately responsible for that level of loss. So that's something I think we should think about. But let me go to the second part of your question,
How
which
do
is
startups practically address
exactly.
or prevent this?
Okay, so let me answer that question first. So the best way to do this, in my experience, because I've worked across different sectors now, and I'm working in a fintech currently, is to regulate yourselves where there is no regulation. And we see the biggest companies doing this. For example, Meta, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, all of them have AI models. All of them have like statements or frameworks that say, this is how we're developing our AI. These are the standards. These are the models that we are using. These are the standards we're setting for ourselves. This is how we're holding ourselves accountable. And the thing with standards that I don't think a lot of people realize is that it's lawmaking, whether you like it or not. Because if enough people, if Google, if Microsoft, if the biggest companies in the world say these are our standards, and everybody has similar standards, that automatically becomes the benchmark for the law. So even if government does want to make a law, especially because that has now become established practice. You know, when we were studying law, they teach us that there are different types of laws. There's industry practice. Some of it is not written or codified down anywhere, but the courts interpret it and uphold those laws because they've been practiced so much. When it is time, if we eventually ever get to the stage where we want to make concrete laws for AI, when it is time to make those standards, they are going to be modeled on what already exists and what already works. So what the government is doing in sort of taking a step back or not trying to understand how AI is and how to regulate it properly is that you're letting the private sector decide what regulation should be, which is not bad. But the private sector is the private sector for a reason. It's profit driven. So anyway, I digress. Back to your question. Again, I'm very passionate about it. Back to your question. The best thing to do would be to create standards for yourself. If you don't have any frameworks to refer to, you can refer to international standards. So for example, there's the EU AI Act, which has like certain benchmarks that, you know, startups could use. So that's one of the ways to do it. Another way to do it is to conduct due diligence internally and to document everything. If there's any mistake, if there's any flaw you notice, document it. Try and say, this is what we did to mitigate this risk. This is what we did to fix it. That's another way to avoid liability whenever law, like if eventually law is ever made. And it's a good way of hedging your risk, particularly for investors, because they can see that even though there is no law, you are operating according to international frameworks, international governance principles, and you are being accountable. As regards, yeah, should I stop? Because I still have
you wind up on that point.
Okay, so another thing that I would say is that the impact of this lack of regulation, particularly for startups regarding investments, is that there's a sort of due diligence paralysis. Investors do due diligence to see how startups are complying with laws, but in the absence of laws, it's very difficult for them to say whether the startups are doing the right thing, quote unquote, or not. So it causes like a due diligence paralysis. And so investors struggle to assess legal risk. And so it's very likely they won't make any decisions to invest in those startups. So what we're essentially doing is crippling our ecosystem by not at least putting guardrails in place for AI regulation of some sort. Another big problem is that it creates an insurance market gap because many startups use insurance to cover their risk. So if there's no clear liability framework, if we're not sure that, for example, is that poor government worker that will suffer, or us, the developers, or whoever else might be liable, then it's impossible to create an insurance framework for the investment or for the startup itself. And so investors are not likely to invest in those businesses. So that's how it could affect startups. And that's what startups could do to sort of mitigate those risks.
Interesting. Now, I want to come back to Emmanuel regarding the public sector. We know that one of the biggest challenges, especially in Africa, has to do with innovative startups partnering with governments to do work. We know governments, especially in Africa, are known for their bureaucracy and then red tapeism. You never get anything done until you go through a very long process. So how do we, as a public sector, how do we design procurement contracts and then governance for these AI systems so that we can ensure accountability is clear and also make sure that citizens have a clear path for redress without scaring off innovative startups? How do we get innovative startups to be able to work with government in the deployment while meeting these procurement standards and other regulatory requirements? Is Emmanuel on the line? Emmanuel.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. Please,
yeah. So thank you for, I heard a question. Thank you so much for the question. I think the issue of procurement or government partnership with the startups and private sector has always been a challenge, because what government wants is accountability, and what citizens want is protection. What startup wants is clarity. Usually the challenge is finding the balance. From the work that we have been doing closely with the government and innovators, we see a common pattern. Startups are not afraid, of governance. They are afraid of unpredictable governance, and that's what we have been seeing. They fear environments where, the rules shift midway, where documentation demands are unrealistic, or where liability expectations make participation very impossible for them. So how do we design a procurement that protects, the public while encouraging innovation? I think the first step is to define a shared accountability. I like what my sister just said when he's talking about that collaboration. The government remains responsible for the public service, and the startup remains responsible for the performance of its model within a defined limit. So when this distinction is clear, neither side carry unrealistic burdens. The second is to require transparency without intrusion. What is going on in Africa right now is like government want that partnership, but he want control of it. Government do not need a startup source code, for example. What government need is a proper documentation, the data source, the model limitation, the known risk, and the audit logs, for example. So this element protect the citizens, and that is the role of the government, without suffocating the innovation, for example, by asking, let's say, give us your source code, for example. And the third, which is crucial, is citizens' redress. No matter how advanced a system is, I think Africans must always have a human pathway for correction and appeal. If an algorithm deny a service, I know you asked the question to the judge, if an algorithm deny a service, people must have a straightforward way, to challenge that decision, ideally in their language, through channels that they trust. That is not the case right now in the countries where I've actually worked in so far. And finally, procurement framework should always, allow for test and learn approaches. We should not ask startups to scale nationally in one day. Ministries should be able, to test solutions, whether in sandboxes or whatever it is, to refine them and also scale responsibly. I think this reduces the risk of giving, the innovation the room to breathe, and also finding that balance between governance and innovation. I hope that responds to your question.
Let me stay on the issue of building trust. We know that for people to have trust in the system, they must come to know the system to be one that reflects whatever it is that they believe in. It ties into the earlier submissions on data exclusion and not even knowing what artificial intelligence means in our local dialects and all of these other things. In fact, we had a session where we met a number of technicians, IT technicians, and we asked whether any of them would be opposed to having an AI diagnose them and then recommend treatment for them. And out of about 50 people in the room, just 3 people agreed they were going to subscribe to that. And these are IT technicians, people within the space. Now, my question is that, you see, digital ID and public AI systems requires immense public trust. If people do not trust it, they can't use it and there will be no use for it. So how do we ensure that in building data sets that are used to train these AIs, the data sets are representative enough and don't hardwire historical biases against marginalized groups? How do we minimize the element of bias that may reflect in the data sets that we develop in using or in developing the various artificial intelligence tools for our local use?
Thank you again for the question. I think my sister, was Na, who asked a question right now to the group just before this session, asking people, how do you define artificial intelligence in your language, whether it's Tree or Yoruba, or whatever it is? I don't think people were able to do that exercise. Why? If your grandmother in the village cannot actually understand what is artificial intelligence in his language, it means she will never trust that system. On my current research work I'm doing is to look at the current trends that we have, like artificial intelligence, through the African philosophies and traditions. Do you know, for example, that artificial intelligence has always existed in African culture? I discovered that during my research. Take Ifa, for example, in Nigeria, which we call Fa in my native Togo or Benin. If you take that Ifa is a prediction. They use chorus, they use mathematics, they use logic, they use algorithm to predict rainfall, to predict soil patterns, etc. So if I go tell my grandmother that, look, today the supercalculator replaced the babalawo, which is the priest, and the data or the algorithm has replaced the chorus, I think my grandmother would trust that system. That is as easy and simple as that. Now, let me come back to the how do you call it, the question you asked. If you take most administrative data set across the continent today, it reflects mostly urban population, rural women, elderly citizens, nomadic communities, cross-border population, and I can keep, quoting them. Beyond those people, we don't have a data set that appear, representing them. So beyond this, we have the linguistic richness. It's dramatically underrepresented. You cannot build a public, sector chatbot in English, for example, or French, and expect a rural farmer to recognize it as a service designed for them. They will never trust it. So what does responsible African approach require? I think it begins with data set audits. Before any model is trained, I think government needs clarity on who is presented, who is present there, who is missing, who is underrepresented. I think this is not a technical exercise. It's simply a governance, obligation. And next, our government to require vendors. I think there's some noise. I don't know where it's coming from. Maybe the technical team should look at that. So what I was saying that the next is government should require vendors to provide transparency on data set composition. When a provider train a model for agriculture, for justice, or for, social protection, for example, they should be able to disclose the population group included. And most importantly, the missing segments. That's how we start solving the problem. Then we need a community participation. West Africa already has a strong tradition of community oversight. We cannot bring this into the digital age by involving, by not involving those people. For example, you cannot go whether to Kumasi or to Kano in Nigeria to tell a farmer that it will rain tomorrow. We are testing, a startup is testing an AI predictable system for a rain to come next week. If the person go and plant his seed and it doesn't rain, you ruin that trust forever. You ruin it forever because those people were not included in the design of those, AI systems. So it's very important for us to understand that is the data sets that go into it that is more important for government to audit, to understand who are underrepresented and correct that or help to solve that. And also add the community participation to it, add the local language digitalization to it, so that at the end of the day, the AI system should understand Africans. Then Africans must define how that data, will be trained so that people at the end of the day are part of the process. Because if they are not part of the process, we are missing a very huge gap. So over to you, Nicholas. I don't know whether you hear me. I hear some noise. I hope it's not my network.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Yes, I was saying that let me stay on the issue of the bias. I want to go to Ilamusi here. Now, you know that the first point of auditing a data set would ideally be for the entity deploying that artificial intelligence, because they collect the data and then use it to train their model before the deployment. And we all know that, especially when it comes to startups, one of your biggest challenges has to do with resources. And so you may not be able to carry out extensive bias auditing the way you may want to, which may still leave some residual biases in there. Now, what is a practical low-cost step that a startup who is constrained for resources can take to test and then mitigate bias in their AI product, so that even with little resources, you still be able to at least do some effective auditing to exclude bias?
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, please. Who is answering?
No, this is Wilamusi. We can probably come back to you later if you have some comments on it.
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yes, please, you can.
Okay, so I think if we're bringing this down to our context, I think that one of the smart ways to go about that is to partner with universities or research institutions who are already sort of researching these topics and are looking for, well, data sets that they can use. So for example, if you're a small startup in Lagos, you can't audit your data sets. But for example, I think it was Naa that mentioned, what's the name of the organization she mentioned again? Yeah, the Institute of AI Policy. You know that the Institute of AI Policy is conducting some research on this. You work in Africa. The data set you're using is based on African data. That's the kind of collaboration that I think that sort of institute would want to work on or work with. And the good thing is that it cuts down your funding because sometimes these research projects are internationally funded or funded by global DFIs. So it's a good way for you to save costs. That's one way, through collaboration with academia or collaboration with research institutes. Other than that, you can do a lot more grunt work within your team. A good way to sort of quote unquote test for bias is to make sure that your team is local and that your team by itself uses the product. In that way, they're able to spot biases. In that way, particularly if they are Africans, they're able to notice gaps, especially if they're knowledgeable Africans, they're able to notice gaps in their usage. But honestly, the most effective thing I've seen so far is academia, private sector collaboration. That is really what has worked. Because even when you have to pay with academia, it's at a much subsidized cost than as compared to like doing it by yourself using another private sector entity.
That is a great summation. Yeah. Because again, academia enjoys both ways. They have need for the research value and then you for the output that comes with it. That's great. But so let me go back to my lord. Your lordship, we know that, take Ghana, for instance, our constitution guarantees against discrimination. But the current state of our laws were made when it comes to discrimination for a human-led world, where somebody does an act or makes a decision that you think entrenches bias and so excludes you, for which reason you can seek relief. Here's the case: we have AI. AI keeps making decisions, automated decisions, and sometimes even the design of the AI may inherently reveal a bias that may not be known to the user. So my question is that, do you think that the current existing laws on discrimination are sufficient in terms of dealing with the harms caused by algorithmic black box, or should the advent of AI demand some new judicial interpretation of discrimination, perhaps one that includes statistical disparity where there's exclusion or a flawed model design as evidence of intent or negligence, so that when somebody designs a system calculated to exclude a certain group of persons, then that should be evidence of some intent of negligence or intent to discriminate?
Okay, so definitely our laws as they are now do not completely take care of those nuanced problems that we may be finding. Now, in terms of dealing with it, if we are going to rely on statutory laws, it will be difficult because, as we have stated earlier, following and enacting laws immediately to sync with AI development is going to be a big challenge. So what do? Are there the practitioner's ethical guide in the use of the tools they are deploying or developing? And this is where I keep saying that, look, the judge is the interface to solving that problem, because where the practitioners or the environment have their ethical rules of engagement, which would be a form of self-regulation, now when there's a problem, I have key indices to rely on in resolving the matter. Because those are the people who are using it. They have a fair idea in terms of the development and easy to trace where there are challenges. Yes, we have spoken enough about the data, cleaning the data, credible data, collecting the data, and all. If it is not coming from an institution that has already cleaned it and reliably used it, how are we now going to say that, okay, this person just collected and just used it? What are the ethical practices that guide their use of data? For those who develop it, do you just collect the data and use it? We all agree that you don't do that. If you are going to, then it must be certified that, look, where it is coming from what we expect to be cleaned had already been cleaned. Now, if I have that data that is reliable, and suddenly it is churning out a certain bias, obviously, we know that where there are certainties, the output should always be of a certain kind. And if the system is known not to just change it, but then it's a human trait that has now influenced the AI tool to churn that out, we will know where and how to trace it to. But ideally, our laws as they sit now cannot bring us that solution. That solution lies with the people in the industry, their practices, their ethics that guides their work, and the judge relying on such ethical rules and obligations that they have set for themselves to make that determination. Challenge is where you find the criminal aspects of it. That's easy to deal with because where there are criminal enactments that give a certain remedy or punishment, we will do it. Where there are tortious issues also coming up, we will do it. Asserting our rights in terms of discrimination is a constitutional matter that has, as I have said, is already guaranteed. Now, the Constitution does not give the nitty-gritty. So us tracing it to fall in line with that is going to be relying on what is supposed to be the ethics of the game. And the ethics is where sometimes we have the challenge. Are we just going to be relying on individuals and their interactions? Are there conventions? Are there policy documents from regional bodies or groups of people to guide us? We have heard there's the EU policy that can be a guide. We should not copy. There are other institutional recommendations that can be guides for us, even though the nations or the states are trying to help develop their own. It is supposed to be influenced by the actors in the area. Your example is very, very informative. Ghana Bar Association, these people, that people, judiciary is excluded. And then what happens? How are we supposed to? So as it is now, we need to rely on the ethical rules to be able to guide us because that is the self-regulatory mechanism that they have. Yes, thank you. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, hi. I can hear you now. I can hear you.
So I was saying the discussion so far has focused on issues of accountability and then liability. And then we have also looked at how to build trust when it comes to data and bias. Now, towards winding up the conversation, let's look at the path forward in terms of collaboration, sandboxes, and then smart regulation. And I want to start with Ilam Wisi. Now, regulatory sandboxes have become one of the most effective ways of allowing startups to innovate while still making sure that their systems are tried on an experimental basis and then refined before it is opened up to the larger market. So you usually find regulatory bodies such as the central banks, the others, containing some of these startups and their innovations. Now, given the experience in the space, my question is that if sandboxes are to be an effective way of containing and trying these new startups, what do you think a truly effective post-West African sandbox for AI startups needs to include to help them innovate responsibly? What should we include in such regulatory sandboxes so that across the sub-region, we can have a more responsible innovation from AI startups?
Okay, thank you for that question. Based on my experience, I'll have to say that I don't think that the sandbox model would work for AI. So the way the sandbox model works is that imagine, I always give this example, imagine children playing in sand, right? The sandbox just draws a line, like it literally packs the sand in a box and says, okay, you can play within these parameters. But then the children don't play forever. Break time is over and they have to leave the sandbox. The problem with the way AI is moving is that I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we will leave the sandbox. And so I'm not sure the sandbox model will work unless we continue to keep like startups who are working on AI within that sandbox continually. There will be new use cases, there will be new developments. We've seen in the last 2 years how AI has leapfrogged from the first ChatGPT model to now ChatGPT 5. We've seen how Claude has developed. And we've seen different use cases in agriculture, education, and there'll be even more use cases. So honestly, I don't think the sandbox model will work unless we're tweaking it to say that those startups will remain within the sandbox process such that they will continue interacting with regulatory authorities, and then regulatory authorities in return will make soft legislation that will guide them as they are going, not like hard legislation like a law, which will take time to get passed. So I don't really see the sandbox model working. But if I were to engage with your question, and say, okay, what if it works? How would we do it? I would say the first thing that needed to be done would be, to some extent, some regulatory harmonization, especially because we're talking about West Africa. If we're talking about creating a West African sandbox, you've rightly mentioned the AfCFTA. We have the Digital Trade Protocol, under which many possibilities can occur. I would think that that would be the first step, to create like sort of standards across, even if it's just our regional bloc in West Africa, standards across West African countries for things like data sharing, for things like data localization, for things like even like liability. If we can create those key standards in place around or within our economic bloc, our regional bloc, then we can talk about, creating a West African sandbox. I think that would be the first step. That would be the first thing to do.
Okay, so I understand your point when you talk about sandboxes and how it may be difficult to keep them in the same place. But it is also a fact that, especially for developments that have wide-scale implications, in Ghana, we have seen it where, especially in the fintech space, before you deploy any application or any use, that likely may require a wide application across the country. The central bank, which is the Bank of Ghana, requires you to, within a sandbox, at least to pilot it for a certain time, know the issues with it, the deficiencies, and try to refine it so that they can minimize whatever problem that may be had when it is put out there. So I think the point about harmonization will still help, if at least for those kinds of products that we can contain in a sandbox, we have that sort of harmonization to experiment with. It will be useful. But let me come back to Emmanuel on this same question. Now, in the public sector, we know that when it comes to sandboxes, there's the need to have an anchor. So do you think that the public sector can act as an anchor tenant in such a sandbox, such that the government would use their purchasing power to responsibly pilot these AI solutions for local startups for the public good, rather than rely on foreign solutions? Government opts that, okay, for all health facilities, I'm going to experiment with a local startup, building something, and then when we pay that local startup and then use our resources to back that local startup up, they can refine whatever that they have done. Do you think that government can be an anchor tenant for such regulatory sandboxes to pilot solutions for local startups in the interest of the public?
Yeah, of course. And I think I will go a different direction than my sister Elausi. I think when we talk about AI in Africa, we have to start with something that many people still overlook. AI is probably the only major technology where African startup can truly lead, not follow. And the reason is very simple. AI only becomes intelligent when it is trained on the realities of the society that's served. And African realities are so different. I keep saying it. We have our language, they are different. Our market structure is different. Our informal economy are different. Our justice system, our farming patterns, our mobility habits, like I can keep citing them. And a foreign company cannot build an AI that truly understands the meaning of, a Wolof proverb, or, I don't know, a tone of Hausa. So this is why the most powerful AI use cases in Africa will not come from abroad. They will come from our own innovators, and that's where the government come in, because the African public sector holds the largest set of problems that matter: education, health, justice, agriculture, social protection, etc. All areas where AI can make a huge difference. And these are areas where African startups are already, have already early prototypes. I think I will not give examples, but the solutions work because they are built on local knowledge. And this is why sandbox can work exceptionally well in Africa. That's where our way separate from my sister, because a sandbox is not a theoretical concept. It's simple, a control space where a ministry and a startup test a real solution on a small scale. For example, one school, one court, one hospital, before deciding whether to scale it nationally. So I know technology is very, very involving. That's why startups must actually move fast with government. This reduces the risk for both sides. It gives government a safe way to innovate, and it gives startups a realistic environment to learn, adapt, and also improve their processes. And here is what makes African Sandbox even more powerful. Our problems are similar across borders, and that's where I come to join her back. We have to unify ourselves. If Africa is our heaven, we don't have two heaven. So we just have to make sure that we make one heaven for all of us. And this is why I always say the digital age, there will be only one continent, one vision. And an African as a single market of 1.6 billion people in the next few decades, if we treat each other, as an island, we will lose the air revolution. But if we build shared sandboxes, where, how do you call it? Ghana will not do it alone, Togo will not do it alone, Benin will not do it alone. While we have the same reality, the same people, the same languages, I think we can do share, sandboxes, share data sets, share standard, and share procurement pathway. I think that's where the startup can actually benefit from the government and also development partners. And African startups are not also reinventing anything. If you look at what is going on in Nigeria and you look at the startups in Ghana, it's almost the same similar use cases. They are adapting, each other's use cases. So this gives the African the opportunity to share experience, align with our languages, align with our culture and our governance needs. And I think that adaptation can be, a game changer compared to the other, countries like Europe and Asia. So I think we can be a producer in this revolution. We can be a pioneer, and I think governments are willing to help. I can tell you from my experience, especially what we are doing right now in Guinea, when we ask every ministry, the private sector, the academia, when we are asking for use cases, you notice that there's a strong political will. And the startups, even the universities now in their curriculum, etc., everybody want to contribute. And government has understood that they can leapfrog using this technology. They can leapfrog using this, revolution to actually meet the demand of their population. So I think sandboxes can work. Technology is changing every day. But if we move fast with technology, we can do something that will be, unique and serve our communities.
I find it very uncanny when you talk about the striking semblance between our problems. You literally leave one African country, enter another, and you realize you are in the same place because the challenges you are facing are the same challenges you are likely to encounter. So I think it will be useful in that regard. Now, let me come to His Lordship. Well, Your Lordship, I know you've mentioned in part the question
Yes.
I'm to answer, if you could emphasize on it.
Yes.
That let's come back to the rule of law. In all of this, like you said, whenever humans interface, there's likely conflict. And whenever there's conflict, it is the courts that you need to step in to try and resolve it. So how can the judiciary support these innovative approaches? And do you think there's a role perhaps for specialized courts or judges trained specifically in technology to provide the sort of legal sanctity that these sandboxes and the innovatives may need in improving the current environment?
To start, I'll also go back to the comment that our sister now made. We need an intentional approach to resolving the conflicts and the challenges in the AI conversation and policy implementation. I decided personally that, well, I like to follow up on technology, so I am going to educate myself. There are a few judges who have done so. Sometimes you cannot choose what case comes before you. And so I was happy when I heard that our new Chief Justice had made it a conscious policy to set up specialized courts for specialized areas. And this was going to be science, environment, and technology. If we don't do that, we will have challenges. The practitioners themselves, and in this conversation, we can tell we are not always agreeing on the same thing. It's not going to be an easy thing. And so even formulating the laws is not going to be easy. Yesterday, I had the opportunity of telling some people that, look, when you see or hear about a law coming up and you don't like, resist it. Because your rights are always paramount. And the resistance doesn't need to be violent. No, advocacy. And so we need a certain uniformity in terms of our presentations. Sometimes we don't get to pay much attention because such multi-sectoral conversations as we have on this platform doesn't really exist. Normally, you will find it's just the tech people doing their thing. Yes. And then you will find the business people in the tech area who are applying their products, doing their thing. Until Bank of Ghana decided to now do the finance and the tech to get the fintech thing, law and tech was not a big deal. Even now, it's just a siloed kind of arrangement we have. So I would say, and I find my answer as part of your question, judges need specialized training. We need specialized courts. We cannot do without it because for AI to thrive, we need the judiciary. People are less likely to trust the government with their rights than they would be to resolve their issues in the courtroom. Business people are more geared towards the courtroom to resolve their problems than a government that has so much power to regulate and have some kind of control over whatever they do. The framework by government in terms of safety, national security, by all means, but that should be foundational so that the people know if we have a problem, our fallback is in the judiciary. Because of that, I also am advocating that, look, our rules of evidence and our laws on evidence, we have to amend them. Because until recently, especially in the land situation, we were not accepting electronic indentures, electronic signatures. Those were problems. Civil procedure rules. How are we going to adopt the use of AI as part of our civil procedure rules? It took a long time for us to even agree that we'll be doing online court trials. Our civil procedure rules as they are now, there's a problem with it. Criminal procedure, electronic evidence and its admissibility, there's a problem with it. Sometimes even when the product comes and you think, oh, this is something I can rely on, how knowledgeable are we when it comes to fakes, deep fakes, and their effect on the courtroom process? We need specialized training, we need specialized courts to understand how AI works, so we can give the best to the people who are developing and are using it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship. So I'm going to come back to each of you finally, and then I would want you to give me one concrete, actionable commitment or policy that you believe must be included in the West African AI governance roadmap. Like the previous conversations and then the previous speakers have said, we are putting together a roadmap. And in the roadmap that we are putting together, we need pillars. So I would want each of you to give me one concrete, actionable commitment or policy that you think should be in the roadmap regarding the three domains of innovation, public service, and then justice to ensure that they are aligned. But before that, basically, the conversation we have been having in terms of substance is the fact that we have highlighted in terms of the things that are most crucial to the public sector, the judiciary, and the innovation startups, is that we need a regulatory harmonization. We need across Africa to have a harmonization to facilitate the innovations and then the interactions between these three spaces. And also we need to attend to the structural exclusion problem that we have. The fact that most of our data sets are urban, excludes very local people, and do not engage with people who are not in formal structures or formal sectors. Does not help us. We've also looked at the issue of liability and then considered the fact that even though AI may be a tool, you, the person who uses it, must be as diligent as your use of the AI itself. And Ilamusi has also highlighted for us that as far as startups are concerned, even in the absence of law, self-regulation and the setting of standards is one of the sure ways to prevent liability. If you can self-regulate, set standards, document your processes, then you can have certain indices against which you work to make sure that your AI does not fall liable when it comes to the services that is rendered to third parties. But more importantly also, Emmanuel has made us aware that what innovative startups fear is not government, but rather unpredictable government. And so governments should also endeavor to have transparent sessions and transparent standards so that you can document your processes and then have people be able to know exactly how these startups are going about their business. We've also, on the question of bias in this discussion, highlighted the fact that our current data sets mostly reflect urban populations, and so there's the need to go back to that if you want to correct bias to reflect rural areas, nomadic groups, and a whole lot of different structures that we have within our current population. And also the need for us to do a data set auditing before training so that you can audit the data set before it is deployed. Our speakers and our panelists have also highlighted why vendors need to provide transparency for the data set that they have, and also the need for us to have community participation so that the data set that you build are built on real experience from the people who you develop the service for or the application for, and not just in an abstract manner. Now, finally, on the issue of the forward collaboration, we've considered the option of sandboxes. And then Emmanuel has highlighted the fact that government is the biggest spender in any economy, and also government holds the largest problems in terms of areas where AI can really make a difference, such as the health sector, the education sector. And so there's need for government to serve as an anchor tenant in giving local innovators the opportunity to innovate and develop within that broader spectrum. Your Lordship has also highlighted the need for us to have specialized course and then specialized training so that amidst these innovations that are being done, we also have competent judges who understand the space and are able to resolve the disputes that may come up as a result of the interactions between the parties within that space. Now, I would want to say quickly one or two comments from the audience. I see that people posted some comments in the chat before I take the final actionable steps in terms of one concrete steps from our speakers. So if you have any comment on the conversation we've been having so far, you can unmute yourself and then speak. There's a comment from Susanna. I think the issue is not with humans reviewing all AI decisions, but rather as the authority deploying the AI model, there should be review procedures by humans in case the AI makes an error. This has become common in traffic offenses. The mistake is made, it is challenged, and the decision is reviewed. This is same as what happened even when a human makes a mistake. There is the opportunity to appeal. So Susanna makes the point that, well, you should have some review processes so that even when the AI makes a mistake, there's opportunity for somebody else to look at the decision that has been made in coming to a conclusion. Is there any contribution or comment from our audience? I'll take just one or two. We are running behind time, so we can bring the session to a close. You can raise your hand and then come in if you have any contribution. Okay, so there's a new message down there. AI is also creating many rules that never existed before, and many of these rules don't require you to code or learn machine language. I mean, that is true. You have currently prompt engineering is one of the things that have come up strongly. And to be a prompt engineer, you don't need to learn coding or to learn machine language. You only need to understand how to reiterate and how to ask questions in a way that gives you the best results. So you are on point with that. If there are no further contributions, then I'll come back to my panelists. Let me start with Elamusi since she took us off. I hope I've been pronouncing your name right all this along before I end up in trouble if I haven't. So kindly give me one concrete, actionable commitment or policy that you believe must be included in the West African AI governance roadmap to ensure that these three domains you represent, the innovation sector, the public service, and the justice delivery system, are aligned.
Thank you. I don't know if I should call you Lenin or Nicholas. Which one do you prefer?
Lenin is fine, don't worry.
Okay, thank you, Lenin. My name is Ilamusi, but I don't mind your pronunciation at all. I was going to say that if I had one recommendation, it would be harmonization. But everybody says that, so maybe a bit more concretely, let me break that down. I would say we should create unified core standards across ECOWAS or our regional bloc. For example, we should have common definitions. We should have a risk-based framework for AI, and we should have common definitions for what we classify as high-risk AI. We should have a liability framework because we've discussed liability very intensely on this call today in our conversation today. So we should have a liability framework. Who is responsible for these kinds of decisions? Who is ultimately responsible for these other types of decisions? We should have harmonized data governance rules and then maybe a mutual recognition of approvals or certifications. So if, for example, Ghana gives a particular startup a particular approval, mutual recognition in Nigeria or in other African countries within this original bloc would also help with harmonization. And then, if possible, this one is a long one, common enforcement mechanisms, because I know enforcement is a big problem in Africa. It's not just lawmaking, but broadly, the point is harmonization.
Thank you very much. Those are very practical, actionable steps. I mean, if the harmonization in the way you envisage it works, it means that across Africa, whichever country you enter, you'll be sure that as an innovator, you have the same standards that you have to adhere to, and you make it easier. Emmanuel, can you please come in with one concrete, actionable step that you think should be included in the West African governance roadmap?
Yeah, so I think I'll end with that as well because I have to rush. But if AI is going to work in Africa, we must break, our colonial barriers that still divide our talent, our market and our ambitions. We cannot pretend that 16, small West African countries will each build our separate future. I always give the example. The US has only one Harvard. Europe has a few shared center of excellence, and Africa, with more than 1.6 billion people soon, cannot afford having those fragmented efforts. We must act as one space. So, as a recommendation for the regional roadmap, I think we should have a regional school of excellence, for AI. A continental institution where we can train our engineers, when we can train our data, stewards, we can train our public sector technologists, because Africa, I always said, people look at it as a continent. I look at it as a country, and we must move with this AI revolution as one market, as one country, as one people, from our diversity, and that diversity should constitute our strengths to face this revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Your Lordship, if you could conclude for us with one concrete, actionable step that you think should be included.
As part of the regional policy
Yes, as a
development.
Regional...
Yes. It's just one thing I'd say. For all the practitioners, no matter what happens, there will be conflict. It is the judge who will resolve the conflict. If you want a resolution that is reliable, push for the training of judges in this special area and let it be paramount, because ultimately every area of our lives has a virtual aspect to it. Maybe apart from marrying and having children, everything else we are doing has a virtual component. If the judge does not understand it, there will be chaos. Push for the training of judges. The judiciary should be a core aspect of the development and policy enforcement in the region. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship. And so, ladies and gentlemen, from this session, we have as part of the West African Finance Roadmap, one, a request for harmonization of core standards, mutual recognition, and common enforcement mechanism. We also have a proposal for the establishment of the Regional School of Excellence for AI, where you can train the various actors and players within the AI ecosystem and expect a certain standard from them. And then finally, we have the training of judges who would become the backstop to resolving conflicts that may arise from these people interacting in the ecosystem. Thank you for staying on the session with us. And a very big thank you to my panelists for also making their time to join us. Hopefully, we will meet on other platforms. Enjoy the rest.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Labs. It's a pleasure.